Shalom and welcome to the European Report here in the European Parliament in the heart of the European Union. And in today's programme we're going to be discussing this new controversial legislation in Israel called the Jewish Identity Bill and how Europe and the European institutions should respond to this new legislation. And this programme today I'm joined by Tomas Sandell, founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, Ruth Isaacs, ECI representative here in Brussels, and also Andrew Tucker, who is the ECI legal counsel as well as the director of the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation. So welcome to the programme. And Thomas, it feels like a very long time since we've recorded here in the European Parliament a programme together, and I suppose we have to appreciate the fact that we can use studios like this, that we have that freedom to talk about Israel and the EU in the European Parliament, which very few parliaments offer such services. So can you share with us and our viewers some of the activities that you've been involved in with ECI and some of the ones you've got coming up in the autumn?
Thank you, Simon. It's so good to be back, and it's true. It's been quite a while, and again we appreciate this opportunity to come back time and time again and be here in the heart of the European institutions and discuss issues which are of common concern for all European citizens. Obviously, summer is supposed to be holidays, so I shouldn't have a long report, but I'm afraid I do have a report. We've been busy. A number of things that I would like to mention briefly. We campaigned, as you may remember, on the incitement in the Palestinian curriculum that we discovered during the course of the spring, and I had meetings in London. We had a campaign in Helsinki. And as a result, there will now be an international review of the curriculum to look into the allegations of incitement to hatred and to see what could be done to make sure that the next edition of these school books will be different than the current one. So this is something that we are very happy about, and it also proves the point that it does matter when we campaign, when we raise our voices, and when we use our influence as citizens. Let me also say briefly that I was in Evian in July, where we marked the 80th anniversary of that terrible international conference, which was dealing with the situation for the Jewish refugees at the time, and as we all know, a conference which failed and didn't manage to find refuge to these Austrian and German Jews, with one exception, and that was the Dominican Republic, and that was very special for me and for some of my colleagues to be there on that 80th anniversary. As far as future events are concerned, already next week we will be traveling both to Jerusalem and then to New York. And on Thursday, the 6th of September, we will organize a Tashlir event on the Rose Garden of the United Nations with the Secretary General as the keynote speaker. And we expect again some 60, 70, 80 UN ambassadors in attendance. And obviously this is a huge undertaking and something which we are very happy again to be able to work together with these international institutions, in this case, the United Nations.
Excellent. I'll look forward to hearing more, Thomas, in the coming months. And Andrew, it's always a pleasure to have you back. And not only are you coming back, but you've written a book called Israel on Trial, How International Law is Being Misused to Delegitimize the State of Israel. And you've also set up your own organisation now, the Hague International for International Cooperation. So share with us about this new organisation, its aims and objectives, what you're doing, and the reasons why you wrote this very important book.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Good to be back. We wrote the book and we've set up the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation to look really at the way international law is being used in relation to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And the book was written as a response, and it's a kind of analysis of the UN Security Council Resolution 2334 at the end of 2016, and this whole idea of the two-state solution. So many of these resolutions and many of the statements from the UN and other international institutions use international law as an argument for saying that there must be a two-state solution and the borders between Israel and this new Palestinian state should be the so-called 1967 lines and so forth. And we look at those international law issues and we pick it apart and we try and show, and I think we show fairly clearly that international law is being used really to impose a political solution. And we believe that international law shouldn't be used in that way. International law provides a framework within which conflicts can be resolved, and it's not up to the UN or the EU or any other multilateral institution to seek to try and impose a solution on the parties. The conflict is one between Israel and the Palestinians, or more broadly between Israel and its neighbours, and it's up to Israel to reach a resolution of that conflict. And the Palestinian right to self-determination is something that has to be worked out together with Israel. So we think international law does not mandate a two-state solution. We think it empowers the parties to negotiate, provides some framework of criteria and principles, but that's it. And we try and show that it's important that international law is used objectively and fairly and transparently, and not in a way to impose really what at the end of the day are either political or military objectives.
Absolutely. And sadly, because our Croatian MEP is not able to join us today, can you tell us from your experience and your expertise, what advice do you have for EU legislators, particularly European parliamentarians, on the need to understand kind of international law and then apply that effectively to the Arab-Israeli conflict?
Well, I think the main message is that the two-state solution, which Europe has committed itself to since 1973 as a matter of formal European policy, common policy, is going nowhere. I mean, it's been 40 years since that policy was developed. It's 25 years since the Oslo agreements, and still a resolution is nowhere in sight. And the message is that political idea needs to be rethought through. And it's time to look at alternative solutions. And we believe that international law provides the framework for doing that. So our message to the European legislators and leaders is to say, well, let's just take the time, let's step back and think of other ways of reaching a peaceful solution, because I think the way that the EU is approaching it is just not going to go anywhere. And you know, there are issues around the status of Jerusalem, the borders, which need to be resolved in a peaceful way.
Absolutely.
Simon, can I just say a few words from the point of view of ECI and policy objectives? For us as an organization, we want to be supportive of any solution that the Israeli government would want to pursue. So I think, to give my own interpretation to what Andrew said, is that it's not for us necessarily to be in opposition to a two-state solution, but basically to say that what the democratically elected government in Israel chooses to do needs our support. If they go in this direction, I think we can have opinions, what is practical, what is pragmatic, what does international law say, but obviously here we want to work together with the Israeli government, and at this moment they have this objective, but I think it's easier for us as an outside actor to speak very freely and non-conventionally about these issues. But I don't want the Israeli government to get the wrong idea that we would be opposed to what is Israeli policy at this time. We can perhaps discuss this later in the program, but I think it's an important
yes, it's
point
good to clarify.
Yeah.
And Ruth, welcome to the program. We're not going to leave you out, don't worry. How important is it that here we are in the European Parliament that Christians engage with not only their members of the European Parliament across Europe, but also engage with the EU institutions regarding Israel, international law, and other various issues that raise themselves in our news?
Absolutely. I think that it is very critical that they do. Sometimes you find that Christians want to be supportive of both sides, or because they want peace, and therefore they feel that the only way to peace is for us to be neutral. But actually, neutrality doesn't necessarily mean that you are standing for what you need to stand. And the best thing that you can do is educate yourself. Andrew has just written this wonderful book. It goes in every single detail that needs to go. And you need to educate yourself in every specific issue that affects Israel at the moment. And this way you can have an informed opinion. Otherwise, you will be educated by what mainstream media, as both my colleagues said earlier, it is a very political issue. What you do here is political opinion and not really international law, not really factual, historical data that we need to have before we can actually have an opinion.
And Thomas, we're here to discuss this new government legislation. I think it's called the Jewish Nation-State Law that the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, just recently passed back in July. Can you tell our viewers about this law, what it consists of, but also how will this then translate in terms of EU-Israeli relations?
Okay, as we have Andrew on the program, I'm looking forward to hear his assessment, which I think will be much more valuable than my own. But nevertheless, I do have thoughts on this bill, and I'm very happy to share it. And I think first and foremost, and this is really the bottom line, the whole idea of a national home for the Jewish people in Israel, a Jewish nation state, is not anything that came up this summer. It goes back to 1947. It has been supported and codified in international law by the United Nations in the partition plan already in 1947, and going back, as we often do, to the Mandate for Palestine in 1922 and San Remo 1920. So I think it's an awkward discussion to have at this point to say, well, we can't have a Jewish state. This was something that the international community agreed on already on those 3 years, 1920, 22, 1947, that we discussed. And it's not time to open that Pandora's box and say, well, we didn't really mean what we said in the UN partition plan when we had all this time to study the whole issue. It is very essential that the identity of the State of Israel is a Jewish state. But what does it mean? And here I think there are a lot of misconceptions, not so much based on facts, but I'm afraid to say there are those that like to take this opportunity again to go after Israel for no substantial reasons whatsoever. But having said this, I think Andrew has, with his legal expertise and having studied the issue, will have much more to say. So I'm happy to pass over. Yes.
Andrew, Israel is the only nation really whose very legitimacy as a nation is often brought into question in academia, in the UN and other international organizations. But can you tell us, for example, how this new Jewish national state law will strengthen Israel's legal standing at home, but also internationally with institutions like the European Union?
Well, actually, this new law doesn't really do anything new. It's not creating new rights or obligations. As Tomas said, the idea of Israel being the Jewish state is not new. This was something that was already embedded in the idea of the Jewish national home in the Mandate for Palestine, and was part of the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel in 1948. It's very clear that it was to be a Jewish national home. And there are many national homes for different peoples around the world. I mean, most states, Greece is an example. It's a national state for the Greek people. And the reconstitution of Greece was very much about reconstituting the national home for the Greek people. But of course, people who don't have a Greek heritage, and similarly people who don't have a Jewish heritage, are able to live as equal citizens in those states. So the law legally is, I think, doing nothing new. I think the timing is controversial. The way it was implemented was controversial. Whether it was implemented in the right way, they're all political considerations. It's a little surprising maybe that it suddenly has come up this time. It's very sensitive, of course, with the peace process going on. It's seen as being something which is perhaps interfering with the peace process. I'm not sure it strengthens Israel's case in any particular way. I think it, on the one hand, law is very much about perception. So it's challenging Israel, I think, to articulate its case.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's putting something onto the table which perhaps was not very clearly on the table. I think that's part of the objective of the law, was to say, well, we are a Jewish state of Israel, but we're also home for non-Jewish people. I would prefer personally to have seen more in the law about the rights of the non-Jewish population. The mandate for Palestine was very clear about that. And I think that's the beauty of the mandate. It said Palestine was to be a homeland for the Jewish people, but equally the political, civil and religious rights of the non-Jewish population were to be protected. That's at the heart of a democratic system, and it's the heart of Israel. Every state is living in a tension between its national identity and the human individual rights of its citizens. Yep. And every state has to deal with that tension, and Israel no less than any state. So I think it's not a new thing that's come on the table. It's also not unique to Israel. It's just very politically highly sensitive.
Yeah. And Ruth, I mean, who could object to this law? Primarily because all it talks about is Jerusalem being the historic homeland of the Jewish people. Jerusalem is its capital. The Star of David is its flag, and the Hatikva is its national anthem. This is common to every member state of the EU, so why are we seeing so much opposition to it, do you think?
I personally don't think that it is controversial at all. It doesn't offer anything different than most, just like I own national homes, they have similar law, and they do make clear what is the flag, what is the language, what is the... So it wasn't, just like my colleague said, that it wasn't anything new as such. It's not controversial in itself. It really has to do with the political situation. And I personally feel that, and as CCI, we personally feel that it is just another attack and another vehicle to attack the Jewish state and trying to offer more tools to accuse unfairly in the international arena that Israel is doing something wrong when the evidence is that they are not. And in terms of the rights of the non-Jewish people, I think they are there. They are still protected, and there has never been anything other than protection for the non-Jewish population, and that is the beauty of democracy.
And Tomas, this new legislation, it's controversial in Israel. It's been taxed by President Erdogan of Turkey, primarily because he's saying this is Israel imposing an apartheid state on its Arab population. And also the European Union has also criticized this new legislation, saying it threatens the two-state solution and the peace process. What is your view to convince European leaders, the European institutions here in the European Parliament, that this new legislation will not actually affect or harm the peace process and Israel's relations with the Arab world?
Well, you know, Simon, one of the pillars of the work of ECI is always education. And you'd be surprised how little historical knowledge there is among the political class And this is a good example. And I've been in several discussions here in the European Parliament when the question has been raised from members of this parliament towards Israeli government officials saying, well, how can Israel be both a Jewish state and a democracy at the same time? Isn't this a contradiction? And government minister has very kindly reminded the member of what was already decided in international law, and it's always been a given. So yes, there can be a Jewish state as much as there can be a British or a Finnish state with all its distinctiveness. And we spoke about it before we started recording the program. Speak about Finland. After the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of Soviet Union, there was this small ethnic group called Inkerilaiset in Russia, and they had Finnish roots. I think none of them spoke Finnish, but they were automatically entitled to citizenship in Finland because of their ethnicity. And many people felt that was a bit odd. Why was this the case? But this is how nation-state building works, and the Jewish state is no different. Yes, in one way it is different because no other people group have been so much attacked throughout the centuries. So if there can be a case built or defended for sovereignty for a particular ethnic group, the Jewish people is the best case to defend, because what we've seen, and in particular here in Europe, is that we were not able to protect the Jewish people where it mattered the most, and hence we had the greatest tragedy ever to happen on European soil, the Holocaust. And this is why these institutions were built here in Brussels, the European institutions, to prevent this from happening again. So I think it's so much embedded in the European understanding to make this link to the horrors of the Holocaust and say what was the solution? Yes, the solution was the recreation of the Jewish state. So in that respect, it's a little bit embarrassing and sad that we have to have this discussion again in 2018. Why is there a need for a Jewish state? Open up our history books and we will see it very clearly.
Absolutely. And Andrew, down to the last 2 minutes of the programme, so I'm going to give you the final word on today's programme. Okay. I mean, the Jewish people are an integral part of the European continent, have been here for thousands of years, really since the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, probably even before that as well. And they played an incredible contribution towards European society. How can we educate members of this parliament, the European Parliament, of the necessity of this Jewish national state bill and its importance to the Jewish people in Israel, but also that relationship between Europe and Israel?
Okay, well, I mean, I guess to pick up Thomas's point, it's important to accept the right of the Jewish people to self-determination like any other people group. So we shouldn't look in that respect any differently to the Jewish people as any other people. But secondly, I think we ought to respect the right of the State of Israel to deal with its problems in the way that it seems best. Israel is not perfect. There are problems of integration of different ethnic groups. The Bedouins is a good example. It's a complex problem. And I don't think it necessarily helps to criticize from the outside. We can assist and we can advise. So I think we ought to encourage the State of Israel to deal with its problems in the best way. Secondly, I don't think this interferes with the peace process in any way. There's nothing in the bill, as I see it, or the law as it's now been adopted, which conflicts necessarily with a negotiated two-state solution that's still on the table. It's just Israel saying we as a Jewish state are negotiating for peace as a Jewish state. Which is also a home for many non-Jews as well. And that's Israel's right in every respect.
Excellent. Andrew, Thomas and Ruth as well, thank you for joining me on today's European Report, and I just want to thank you all for watching this programme filmed here in the European Parliament in Brussels, which is in the heart of the European Union. And today we discuss the question of how Jewish identity, particularly the Jewish state, is coming under attack in Europe, and it's important that we raise awareness with this with our members of the European Parliament and that we stand with Israel and we stand with the truth. So thank you for watching today's European Report.